Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Last Edit Podcast, a podcast on film starring yours truly, Silver Hawkins, and the amazing.
Citizen Sleeve, hello there.
As regular listeners will know, this is a weekly podcast on film, during which Sleeve and I alternate between choosing a film to watch, and then we discuss it. Sort of long form discussion is what we kind of aim for. Sometimes we fall a little short on that, depending on the movie. But that is sort of the aim that we're trying to go for, and we're trying to highlight sort of movies that don't really get a lot of publicity, that don't get a lot of reviews or mentions, that don't get a ton of videos on YouTube or like podcasts or the like. So this week I have picked another comedy. We've sort of been on a comedy streak of late, and I've picked another one, and it's another Blake Edwards film, just not a Pink Panther film. It is the 1965 The Great Race, which at the time it was made was the most expensive comedy ever made, and I think that's sort of like production value is evident on screen when you watch it, even today. It's a movie that I didn't even know existed until I was like, I think around 18 or 19 when I saw it on Turner Classic Movies back in the 90s. And really sort of fell completely in love with it because it is sort of the live action version of a lot of childhood cartoons, from Roadrunner to Wacky Races and movies of that sort. It's just it has a lot of charm to it, and Jack Lemmon is marvelous as the malevolent Professor Fate. Like the machines that he gets to use throughout the movie are amazing. It's a movie. Yeah, it's a movie I fell in love with, even though there are some uneven patches. But I just like the production quality, the atmosphere, all the set design, the production design, all of it is just like really top notch. I think anyway. You hadn't seen it before, so what did you think upon seeing it?
It was quite an interesting film because like you said, it essentially the template for things like Wacky Races and Catch the Pigeon, and it quite literally is the template for
Yeah.
Catch the Pigeon and Wacky Races. There's even a bit where a guy's trying to literally catch a pigeon. I was like, there's got to be something in it. It felt to me like the template for a lot of films that came later, things like Cannonball Run, films that are about this great race and have these fantastical machines. And as you said, it's got some amazing production values. You can see the money on screen. The vehicles that they've all produced, the set designs, they're all outlandish for the time period. And some of the cars they created, I mean, some of them one still exists today, two still exist today.
They both still exist today, and they're both still drivable today.
That's an amazing feat of engineering to have built those vehicles back then, and yet they still run perfectly now. Shows you where we live in a world that things don't last very long now, but back then they really did because they were built to. I thought it was great fun. I think Peter Faulkner is quite funny as the
as the
sidekick.
assistant. He's like with his accent and hey professor,
Hey, Professor. Yeah, he's pretty
push the
good.
button, Max.
Natalie Wood is really good as the reporter who is trying to cover the race and wants to follow on along the race and get her own car and all that stuff. And then the standout is quite clearly Jack Lemmon, who is absolutely bloody hilarious. I've never seen him play a role like this. I've seen him play all kinds of roles before. The Apartment, Grumpy Old Man, Glenn Ross, all kinds of stuff. But I'd never seen him in a role like this, and he's not Professor Fate, dude. He is Dick Dastardly.
Yeah.
All he needs to do is have a slightly longer touch and twist at the end.
I think he's in part based on Snidely Whiplash from the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, which had premiered earlier.
Makes sense.
Like,
That makes sense.
Who tied like ladies to railroad tracks and stuff. Yeah. Like in terms of his like design, his character design with the black cape and the black top hat and the swirling mustache.
Very classical villain-esque. Yeah, very cool. The only letdown in characters to me, but I think it was because he was in a role which was the very straight-laced frontal stand-up guy, was the Great Leslie, which was Tony Curtis. Now, Tony Curtis is a funny actor. He's been in plenty of things since. But I get the feeling it was probably one of his first big leading men roles in a comedy, anyway.
Well, no, there had been Some Like It Hot before this.
Oh, of course.
Which was another collaboration between him and Jack Lemmon. And ironically, the same thing sort of happens in Some Like It Hot that happens in The Great Race, which is that Jack Lemmon sort of ends up stealing the show, really, from Tony Curtis.
Yeah,
At
I think
least I think so.
Curtis does well. He does well, but he's in a role which is quite confined.
Yeah.
He's better. He's better later on in the film when he's got a little bit more to do, especially with Natalie Wood when they kind of have their slightly abrasive relationship. I think that works really well. But it's a film very much of two thirds and a third, as we
Yeah.
discussed. I feel like the first two thirds are exactly what I expected it to be, and then a little bit more so because of the time period it was made. It was breezy, it was funny, the characters had a lot of charisma about them. Natalie Wood as the reporter is really, really funny at times, and very much pushing women's politics and women's rights and hitting a wall with a lot of men and things like that. And she plays that role really well with a great amount of energy. And of course, at the time when she gets her first car, we should say that so she wants to cover the race.
We
And
should
she
probably
goes to
just
this
start
newspaper.
with the basic synopsis of the film,
Quick backup, yeah.
which is basically the two main characters are the great Leslie and his sort of arch nemesis, Professor Fate. And the great Ed Leslie is this great daredevil. He does all these amazing stunts, and then Professor Fate tries to foil him, fails, and then he tries to do his own stunts and fails at those as well. And I think though, like those vignettes of him like trying to sabotage the great Leslie and then trying his own stunts are the best parts of the film to me. They're like classic 5 minute cartoons basically. And like the various machines from like the bicycle blimp to the submarine to to the car they're driving to the eventual Hannibal 8 that Professor Fate then builds for the race. But anyway, Leslie, the great daredevil, goes to an American automotive company and convinces them to sponsor a race from New York to Paris. This was actually based on an actual race from New York to Paris in 1908, which is also when the movie is set. So it's the beginning of the 20th century. Women do not yet have the right to vote in the United States, which is why there's a heavy like suffragette element to the film as well. And then they basically go from Paris to cross the world to Paris. With hijinks along the way, as Professor Fate basically sabotages his competition, also manages to sabotage himself, and
Many times.
yeah, and yeah, it's so you can go on with the point you were making. Sorry.
Well, yeah. So it's just the pacing of the film is really weird. Like the first two thirds of the film are the race, the
Yeah.
build up to the race itself, and it's really fun and it's quick and it's bouncy as a film, and it keeps you going. It's very breezy. The characters are really fulfilling in the way they develop on screen and have a go at each other, and they have this kind of animosity towards each other, especially Fate and Leslie, obviously. But then as we hit this weird hiatus where people are kidnapped, the whole film kind of stops and slows right down and is not about the race anymore.
We should probably say that like The Great Race is basically kind of Blake Edwards' love letter to old cinema, or what was old cinema at his time. The movie is dedicated to Laurel and Hardy. You'll find a lot of like silent movie references in the film, from the way visual gags are set up, like the way the balloon, Leslie's balloon, after he jumps out, the way it lands on Professor Fate, and Max, his assistant, is right out of a silent movie or like a Buster Keaton film.
Yeah.
And there's another scene in like a sheik's tent on the beach between the great Leslie and Natalie Wood's character, which harkens back to like Rudolph Valentino and his like leading man romantic parts as an exotic sheik. And there are like continual like references throughout the film, and one of the largest ones is in the last third, where the movie basically becomes a riff on the old movie The Prisoner of Zenda, which is sort of a different kind of take on The Prince and the Pauper, where a prince and basically finds a doppelganger, and then that doppelganger gets put in his position for political advantages. And a similar thing happens in The Great Race, where Jack Lemmon's Professor Fate finds out that he looks exactly like the prince of one of the countries they're passing through, and then becomes embroiled in sort of the political turmoil of that country.
And I don't think that works.
No.
It's my biggest bugbear in the entire film.
Yeah.
You could hack off 40 to 45 minutes of this film. You could erase that whole third act, apart from the very end and the pie fights, which we'll get to. And you could have a much more coherent, more balanced, a film with a better pace and more engagement, I think, because that's the bit that lost me. Not
Yeah.
that it was complex in any way or particularly bad. It was just a different movie. And even Jack Lemmon's portrayal of the prince, I'd enjoyed him so much.
Yeah, but it's
as
so
Fate.
over the top. It's even more over
very.
the top than Professor Fate, because
Yeah,
Professor Fate is still
massively
like
so.
somewhat subdued, even though he has these outbursts on occasion. But like the prince is just like a constant outburst.
Like I was watching with my fiance, as we all were, and the bits that really got her was any time he laughed as the prince.
Yeah, yeah.
Anytime she couldn't, it was like chalkboard type stuff. She could not deal with that laugh, and I can understand why. But for the most part, I can see why it's so important to a lot of similar films that came after it, the cartoons, Saturday morning cartoons in particular. It's clearly had a huge influence on these things that came up a little bit later in the 70s and 80s. I really like the opening as well. That first half an hour, as you said prior, is probably the most standout part of the film because it feels like a 30-minute live-action cartoon.
Yeah. Or basically just a marathon of these like little 5-minute cartoons that we would watch like as kids.
Yeah. Like a Tom and Jerry skit or
Yeah.
Wacky Races or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, whenever I've seen like discussions on the film, it's generally like by people who saw it when they were kids. It's extremely well loved. I think it's a really, really good film to watch with your kids. To sort of, because there is that sort of cartoonish foundation to it. Like Max and Professor Fate blow up dozens of times, but are never really seriously injured. Professor Fate,
they've got this shed they keep building things in, and every now and again it just explodes.
Yeah. Professor Fate does sort of break his thumbs, but only briefly. And yeah, it's just it's funny, it's charming, it's there's nothing really. I mean, it is very much of its time, but I think it's still to an extent it still holds up, much like silent movies, like silent movie comedies still hold up, much like film of that era often still hold up because what they deal with is sort of universal in terms of comedy, like slapstick is. Doesn't matter if it was filmed in 1918 or 2018. It's still funny.
Oh, the jokes hold up. The physical comedy holds up. Again, Lemmon is absolutely bloody fantastic. Some of the scenes he's in and the dynamism he brings to those scenes is electric at times. Faulkner plays this brilliant, underwhelmed sidekick who's always getting Falk. He's always getting in trouble for doing stupid things, incorrect that the professor wants, or pressing the wrong lever and something else happens.
Yeah, I love the scene where he sabotages all the other cars, and he does such a good job, and then he sabotages their own car because he doesn't realize it was their car.
85% correct, but not quite all the way.
Yeah, and
it's a film.
I think probably my favorite scene is at the very end when with a twist that I didn't see coming when I first saw it, which is that the great Leslie basically stops the car and gives up his win in order to declare his love for Natalie Wood's character, and then he gives the win to Professor Fate, who is first over the moon and then becomes extremely bitter about it because he knows the great Leslie just gave him the victory, so he can't really enjoy it. And like the rant he goes on why he hates Leslie with his constant clean clothes, his dapper teeth, and like it's really, really relatable. I mean, The great Leslie is to a large extent fairly obnoxious in the movie, even though he doesn't mean to be. But he really is, because he has that perfection. He even has like the glinting teeth, the glint in his eyes, like literally. And yeah, and so the rant that Jack Lemmon goes on as Professor Fate in that moment is really relatable and really, really, I think, carries his character.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think my favorite scene in the film, or sequence in the film, is when they're on the ice. So they get to the
Yeah, yeah.
situation in the middle of the race when they're
They're in
basically,
Alaska and they're supposed to
yeah,
pass over the Bering Strait to Russia.
and they get stuck when the ice starts melting just on this piece of ice floating in the ocean, and all the cars are parked up and water's coming in, and they try to work out what the hell to do, and it's so funny. Just having those four characters bounce off each other, or even prior to that,
With
when
Max
they're
breaking off his mustache.
yeah, when they're
Professor
covered in
Fate's
snow
mustache.
and
Yeah.
the cars are both
Yeah,
next to each
yeah.
other, and the great Leslie and Natalie Wood are just the only thing they've got is champagne. So it's the middle of
Yeah.
a blizzard, and they're just sipping champagne. And then
Because
the other
that's the
two,
only thing the great Leslie brings is just champagne.
yeah, you don't need anything else. You should have had caviar as well, just to make it perfect.
Yeah.
And then the other two, Dr. Fate and his assistant, are like higher up in their car, like it's a Wacky Races car with a bear in the back, and they have to get out and get into the other car, and then they're all in there,
Yeah.
covered in a blanket and snow, drinking champagne. Absurd, very absurd, but it works, and that's why I think this is why I think adults coming at it now who don't have an appreciation for older cinema, and a lot don't, a lot hit a certain wall at the 90s or the 80s, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
I think they might struggle with the last third, that last act.
Possibly.
They
Yeah.
they might struggle with a bit more than that, but I think that would be the main thing. Whereas a kid will view it, as you mentioned, like a cartoon. These outlandish, over-the-top characterizations that fit very neatly and nicely into those over-the-top cartoons characters that we've grown up with. So I think a kid would sit and be really engrossed by it, and they'd probably even find the prince that Lemon plays as well, you know, in the doppelganger terms,
Yeah.
really funny, because he's even larger than life than Dr. Fate is, who's, as you said, a tiny bit more subdued. But yeah, there are some great moments in this film.
Yeah, I also love the moment where, like, because of course the prince has Pomeranians in his bedroom, like four pugs, and and the moment they do the switch, and so Professor Fate comes up to the prince's bedroom, meets the pugs, and he instantly hates their guts.
Off the
And
bed!
he's cute, and one of them stays on the pillow, and he just turns around and looks at it. I hate you.
Yeah, difference in characters palpable. It's
so funny.
It is. It's such an odd film though, because it's got like there's that whole newspaper guy who then is
Yeah.
like, and the women take over. This whole kind of subplot or sub theme of women's rights and women being in the environment of men, and the you know,
Which
you know
was
what
very
boats
much
you could drive.
also like very of the time in 1965 when the movie was made.
Oh, absolutely was. It was incredibly prominent, and the way they dealt with it, I think for the era was relatively good. I think now you can look back with, you know, however many years hindsight, over half a decade, and go, okay, the bit in the tent, okay, there's some areas here and there. But at the time, that must have been a really strong representation of women and a really strong representation of why women should have the rights that men do. Because she does everything almost that the great Leslie can do.
Yeah.
Okay, she's bested in a fencing match, and there's other areas that she's bested in. But she drives the car, she helps them,
She outsmarts him.
she outsmarts them all the time. And even in the bar brawl, when like in that third act, when
Yeah,
they're in that
when
bar
she
brawl.
recognizes Professor Fate and what he's
Yeah.
sort of there to do.
Exactly. You know, she's the one who's kind of she's the smartest out of all of them. She's the one who can think outside the box and understands the situation better, and I think that's performed really, really well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's funny though. Natalie Wood didn't actually want to do the movie. She only did the movie when I think it was Jack Warner promised her a leading role in a movie that she really did want to do, like under the studio system. And that was basically how she ended up agreeing to doing the movie. And apparently, it was really, really difficult for her to do the movie, like physically, very, very exertive. Very
Well,
demanding.
yeah, I mean, it's not the kind of movie that Natalie would have been in before or since, really. And it's a very big studio tentpole comedy movie. And back then, when you were within the studio system, four bigs, the three majors, the four minors, you would have to work within their structure, and you would
Yeah.
always have to make a deal to make a film that was a tentpole film or a film that was a big family friendly thing, and then you would be able to go and do a double indemnity, a film noir or something which is more inventive, surreal, intelligent, speaks to the audience in a different manner. But it was always that balancing act. Only really Stanley Kubrick had carte blanche at Warner Brothers. There are not many other directors or actors. There are some actors who could, once they get to a certain level, Cary Grant, for instance,
Yeah, when you reach the level, yeah.
when they reached that kind of level, they had the ability to be able to convince the studios to let them pretty much do what they wanted, but they had to reach such a high level to attain that. And Kubrick was really one of the only directors who ever got that. So you had to maneuver and you had to do things you didn't want to do. But I could see why, because it's a really physical film. It's all about buffoonery and physical comedy, and for someone maybe who hadn't done that before, and also we're dealing with 1965 physical comedy. We're not dealing with 2020 physical comedy. That they are two very different things. I mean, you look at just what happened with Brendan Fraser doing the Mummy films. He destroyed his body, and that was the late 90s, early 2000s. Health and safety barely existed in 1965. So the amount of things they were being asked to do, and the sets will have been rough in terms of how they were designed in materials. It wouldn't have been as placated in health and safety conscious as they were now.
I mean, there's a really big scene that we haven't mentioned. That is the biggest pie fight in movie history. Is in this movie. It involves 5,000 pies getting thrown around, and that sounds fun. Except as Jack Lemmon says, getting hit by a pie can be like getting hit by a brick. He got knocked out at one point by a pie. And Natalie Wood got hit like repeatedly in her underwear with pies. So yeah, it must have been a really, really physically grueling film for a lot of reasons. Like there are some pretty good stunts in it too. Like the very beginning in one of those vignettes with the air balloon, with climbing back up into the balloon is obviously, I think, like an actual stunt being done by a stuntman.
Well, it runs the gamut of stunts as well.
Yeah.
Land, sea, air. I mean, every facet of environment you could use for physical comedy is used for physical comedy, and it's to great effect. And the difficulty in doing that in 1965, some of it would have been really, really difficult. Yeah, the pie fight is really funny because up until then, I guess Bugsy Malone, which you should watch, we've done a podcast on that a little while ago. That's the pie fight that has always stuck in my mind as the biggest pie fight. But when you see this one, and you realise, I don't think people watching it are just assuming it's custard pies. They're not going to hurt. These pies will have been there for a very long time. They will have hardened. So imagine getting hit by a paintball with a surface area like that. I mean, it's very, very different. So you can imagine how much they get hurt on set and how much.
It's funny, like
that would be difficult.
The first day they filmed was that pie fight was a Friday, and then they stopped filming and they went home for the weekend. And when they came back on Monday, everything was just rotten, and the stench was very, very difficult to get out of the studio.
Yeah, I don't think you would have been allowed to do that now. Somehow, I think somebody would have had something to say. But back then, even the biggest directors were essentially guerrilla filmmakers, kind of doing what they wanted. Until we hit really the 80s and 90s into the big summer blockbusters, these directors could just do whatever they wanted on set, which is why you often hear about horror stories from actors and people who worked in the crew on big films like this, because they could get away with anything. You think Uma Thurman talking about Kill Bill and the shit she went through with Quentin Tarantino was bad. Go back 30 years, 40 years. Whoa, they had to deal with a lot of stuff.
I will say, I mean, I think this movie really sort of cemented Blake Edwards as a comedy director. Like he was really phenomenal. Like he has a lot of really, really solid comedies that are worth looking up, even beyond the Pink Panther movies. Another collaboration he did with Peter Sellers was The Party, which is a movie I watch like every New Year's, which a movie that has not aged well politically correctly because Peter Sellers plays an Indian gentleman named Rundivi Bakshi with complete with brown face,
Blackface. Okay,
yeah.
right, yeah.
Yeah. But it's a fairly funny movie all the same. If you can look beyond those things, and the fact that the movie was very much of its time. But
You
yeah,
always have to take that into account.
I mean, I remember seeing him get the honorary Academy Award, like Lifetime Academy Award, like I think maybe 10 years ago or so, Blake Edwards, and he showed up in a wheelchair with a rocket on it. Basically, and I kind of rocket on and basically propelled himself around on stage, from what I remember, like he should, because you know he's Blake Edwards.
That's a great way to encapsulate physically, kind of, you know, okay, he was
Yeah.
much older then, but to encapsulate who he was as a comedian or a comedy director. Absolutely amazing. I still remember Jack Lemmon being given the Oscar by Ving Rhames. Was it Golden?
No, that
Golden
was
Globe by
that
Ving
was
Rhames?
Golden Globe.
Just because of his life's work, and he was in so much awe for Jack Lemmon.
I mean, Jack Lemmon was nominated for the TV movie version of 12 Angry Men, where he starred along with George C. Scott, where Jack Lemmon basically played Henry Fonda's character, from what I remember. I've seen the TV movie as well. It's fine, though I don't think it's as good as the original 12 Angry Men.
No, the film is certainly better, but for a TV adaptation, it holds up.
Yeah, it does for sure. And Ving Rhames was nominated for playing Don King, and won for playing Don King in another TV movie. And gave basically gave his Golden Globe
to Jack Lemmon. Yeah, which I thought was wonderfully heartwarming. You should check that out on YouTube if you haven't. It's a really cool award moment, if there are that many cool award moments. I'm getting so sick of award shows. Anyway, back to the film. I just think if people want a really good family-friendly film that reminds them of being a kid, like, I'm 40, and watching this film took me back to being prior to 10 years old again, maybe 7 or 8, watching Saturday night cartoons. Saturday morning cartoons. And there are other films of that ilk that fitted around that time period as well. Journey to Center of the Earth, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. They're very different films, don't get me wrong, but that's the kind of stuff that I was watching on TV at the time, these big action adventure films of the 50s and 60s that were really fun. And this is one of those really fun films. And as Silver said, if you've got a young family and you just want them to experience a bit of joviality, a bit of laughter, a bit of good family time and silliness and silly characters, and have your kids laughing at pies being thrown and balloons being burst and mustaches being broken off in the ice, you know, they're really, really cool moments that kids will be really up for. And I think if you're an adult, take off your modern hat and step backwards and just appreciate it for what it is, because as you said, it's got some of the most fantastic set design for a film of its ilk.
Yeah,
comedy of its
time.
time.
I just love the fact that Professor Fate puts his name on everything. Like, he makes a torpedo and he puts Professor Fate on the torpedo.
Yeah. Just to make sure there's no stealth or questioning involved of the actual person who intended to cause this crime. Absolutely brilliant. And I can't take my hat off enough to the principal cast. I think Lemmon and Woods absolutely steal this film.
Yeah,
Lemmon steals a lot of what he's in,
and Peter Falk to an extent.
Peter Falk to an extent, although it's a slightly lesser role for obvious reasons.
that scene in the pie fight where he comes in dressed as the monk, and he goes, "Hey, Professor," and just gets pummeled with pies, is probably the funniest scene in the pie fight, I think.
I don't know. My girlfriend was both getting really annoyed and laughing her ass off at the fact the great Leslie had been there for 10 minutes. No pies landing on him at all. Yeah. It's all great. It's all fine. Pies won't touch me. And then finally he gets pied. Yeah. But she was laughing her ass off at that. That was really funny.
Yeah, it was. That's a really great gag that Edward set up. Also, if you are a film buff, like we touched on, this movie is full of references to like old Hollywood of the silent era.
Yeah, late 20s, 30s, 40s.
Yeah, from Laurel and Hardy, Buster Keaton to Rudolph Valentino and The Prisoner of Zenda. Eventually, even has like a fairly lengthy fencing duel, which is really, really weird because like that's one of the major tonal shifts in the movie. Is there's been this, it's been really really silly, and then all of a sudden it tries to go for tension in the scene
Yeah.
between the great
Yeah.
Leslie and the Baron.
Yeah, and
Where
the Baron, who is just suddenly the villain now. It's like, why aren't you fighting Dr. Fate at this point? What the hell is going on?
and then he jumps out, like similar to the escape scene from Prisoner of Zenda, except he does it much less gracefully and actually accidentally crashes into the boat that's waiting for him.
Yeah. Which is another great thing that Blake Edwards does. You know, he
Yeah.
takes these heroic situations
he
of classic
subverts
films
them.
and subverts them and messes them up a bit. Yeah, really, really funny.
Because up
Well,
until then, like the Baron has like been really graceful and really sort of
Yeah.
in control up until he basically gets foiled by Leslie and then makes his escape, and then he just completely bungles the escape.
As does everyone in the movie at some point, apart from the great Leslie, who always seems perfectly fine about things.
Yeah, until
I
he is
quite
undone
like-
by a woman.
Yeah, I quite like his partner as well, the shaven-headed guy with the mustache. He looks like a classic
Yeah.
weightlifting circus.
Yeah,
You know who I mean?
yeah. The strong man. Yeah.
Yeah, strong man. He's really good in it, and there's that bit where Natalie Portman dupes him
Yeah.
into not coming on there, and then she assumes the role of partner with Great Leslie, and he's like, "What has happened to my partner?"
Yeah.
Oh, he just said he had to do something, you know. Got on a train, off he
Yeah.
went, and she's handcuffed him to a train.
Yeah.
I really like those little moments. I think people are like this. I think kids especially, as I said, but I think adults will like this if they just give
Yeah.
it a bit of time. As you know, the first hour and a half is really, really breezy. It's totally the race, and then that third act will slow right down, and you might be a bit, but then we do kick back in for the end sequence, the pie fight. It's just a really, really fun. It's a fun Saturday night with your family, drinking a cup of tea, chilling out, kind of a movie
Yeah.
with
I
some
would agree.
with some nice, nice
A
underlying
little
themes
on the
about-
lengthy side. It does run 2.5 hours, but I mean, we say that, but 2.5 hours to a large extent is basically standard running time for a lot of movies nowadays.
dude. Some of the films we've watched are 5 hours long. I just don't care. I mean, I've been so past durations of films for a long time now. Hey, if you want to go and watch Showa, which is 11 hours long, go and do that. If you want to watch Andy Warhol's Empire, which is a shot of the Empire building where a bird lands once and then flies off, by all means, that's like 8 hours long. So, by comparison. But yeah, it is too long. It does outstay its welcome in pace terms. You could lob off that 40 minutes and it would be a better movie
you
for
could.
it, I think. But I still think it holds up and I still think it's worth a watch.
Yeah, I agree very much.
Okay, well, I think that's enough for The Great Race. Go and watch it, guys. It's available most places. It's really, really fun. And it'll just, with everything going on right now, I think it'll give you a little bit of a lift and a silly laugh.
Hopefully, yeah.
Hopefully. Okay, so next week I'm going something a little bit different and a little bit surreal. It's not necessarily massively obscure, but it's become more obscure over years. And that is Terry Gilliam's 1985 film, Brazil.
Oh, yeah.
So Brazil is, for film connoisseurs out there, I'm sure they'll know what this film is.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, Terry Gilliam is the Fisher King. That's his big film. And there are others besides. Brazil is the weird, off-kilter, surreal, mad bastard film he made. It's odd to describe. I'll do it very quickly. Sam Lowry is played by Jonathan Pryce, who's this downtrodden office worker in a very weird dystopian office world going on here. And he has these dreams about being a hero and rescuing a damsel in distress. The only other thing I'll tell you about it is Robert De Niro plays a maverick plumber. I think that's the best way to describe him in that film, a maverick plumber. But it's a very odd, unusual, and interesting film that I've liked for quite some time, but I haven't seen it in probably 15 years plus now. So I thought that'd be an interesting one for us to view again. I assume you've seen it before at some point?
I've seen bits and pieces of it, but I've never actually seen the entire film in one go.
Ah, that's cool. That's really cool then. That'll be a nice film to get into if you
Yeah.
have only seen bits and pieces, so you can understand the flow and how it actually works.
I would say just honorary shout out as a Terry Gilliam film is Baron Munchausen. I always had a certain fondness for that film.
Baron von Munchausen is a film that I grew up with, and along with Jabberwocky,
Yeah.
really, really like. Yeah, go and watch. And Time Bandits. Go and watch all of those films. They're all absolute genius. They're all lovely to watch and so funny. And a lot of the Pythons are in them. Okay, so that's been the Last Edit podcast this week. Now, with the whole self-isolation thing going on, Silver and I have been doing some new stuff in the background and stuff specifically for that, along with all the podcasts. We're also at Anchor and Spotify and iTunes. And I am essentially trying to upload. They're all uploaded, and we're nowhere near YouTube. So I'm trying to release one a day or one every other day. So there's more and more content for you guys to watch and talk about and discuss with your friends and stuff like that. Yeah, great job. Doing my best. So anyway, that has been us this week. Brazil next week, which should be bloody hilarious. Talk to us in the comments about the Great Escape.
I realized that came off as sarcastic. It was not.
Dude, we literally speak in sarcasm. Literally. Maybe it comes across.
So it's important to point out when we do not. So.
That is true. That's weird, isn't it? Most people point out when they're being sarcastic. We have to point out when we're not. God damn it. Okay. Come and follow us. Talk to us in the comments. What do you think about The Great Race? Have you seen it before? Is it one of your favourite childhood movies? Or is it something you come across recently? Something you're interested in? Talk to us in the comments about your favourite race movies. You know what I'm talking about.
That could be interesting.
Phileas Fogg, Cannonball Run. There's plenty of awesome ones out there. Even that more modern one with Jackie Chan. Or that was that Cannonball Run? No, it was. That was his first American role, I think.
I mean, he did Cannonball Run. Yeah, he also did Around the World in 80 Days, as well, where he played Passepartout, because obviously, right.
Totally fits. Yeah. Totally fits. Couldn't see past that. Oh man.
Yeah.
And if you want to laugh, just randomly, go and watch our podcast on a film called The Bear. Just watch it. Don't ask questions. Just go and watch it, okay?
Just watch the movie, alternatively.
Or just watch the movie and have a laugh and then watch the podcast. They're both genius. Okay, I've been Citizen Sleeve. This has been the Last Edit. And with my wonderful friend...
Silver Hawkins.
Take it easy, folks. Have a wonderful week and keep safe.
Yeah, stay safe and take care of yourselves.